our session now is about reflections on conflict transformation, peace building, and transformative peace building. I put the reflection because basically a lot of these things already, and some of them we have discussed also in the previous sessions. The first reflection is that why does certain conflict persist and difficult to resolve? So for example, looking at this protracted social conflict, which many of these conflicts exist in Southeast Asia. And if you I think some of you are aware that the PSC has been a perspective or a concept that came up with Edward Azar, looking at difficult conflict situations. And some of these difficult conflict situations, which we call PSC, they are difficult because they have certain ingredients. For example, communal identity. When you have communal identity, when identity as a value is involved in a situation, it always makes it more difficult. The actors belong to different identity and they see it as a problem of us against them. And there is a connection, between within our own group and your group, have different identities, and they see this as us against them kind of thing. And that makes it difficult when you have human needs that are not being fulfilled. You have governance issues. Governance meaning that instead of trying to manage peacefully or resolve the situation, the authorities would send in troops, and would suppress the situation. So lack of good governing skill, is involved. Then you have that problem. And then also international linkages, meaning that the conflict does not exist in that particular vacuum only, but is also affected by international actors like diaspora, for example. And diaspora, I think we all know, can be problematic, if they tend to support the continuation of a conflict situation by providing, moral, financial, military support, and all those things. These are the kind of things, that can make a conflict protracted. Protracted meaning, it goes on and on and on. Some people also use the term intractable. That it continues. Okay, so that is one reflection. The second reflection is, what is the missing element that we need to introduce to move the process towards peace? Okay, what are the missing elements? So please, bear this in mind in our discussion, and then maybe you can have ideas on what are some of the missing elements that we need to introduce. When should conflict transformation and peace activities be done, by whom, and how we should do it? So these are basically some of the issues that I will discuss in my presentation. So I'm reflecting on this. I hope that you can reflect together with me. We have the reflections in the beginning, and then we also have some basic assumptions. Okay, before we discuss conflict transformation. So we first of all, the basic assumption that what we want to achieve is sustainable positive peace as the end goal. Okay, we know what positive peace is all about. We know that we also want it to be sustainable, given the fact that many conflict situations tend to be revived again after some time. So sustainable positive peace, meaning that the structure for peace that we build has to endure whatever challenges that might come up in the future, so that peace can be sustained. So that's basically what it means, sustainable positive peace. And assumption also that transformation is moving from one space to another, okay, and focus on changes that need to be made in order to move forward. In order to move forward, sometimes we are stuck in a difficult position, and we are stuck in a position that even if we want to move forward, we cannot. So there are certain things that can and should be transformed. So that's what it is meant by transformation. The third basic assumption is these similarities and overlapping focus of conflict transformation and peace building. So many authors, many scholars, in fact, when they talk about conflict transformation, they actually mean peace building. And when they talk about peace building, they actually mean also conflict transformation, because the ingredients are more or less the same. We also talked already about the multiplicity of actors, meaning that there are a lot of actors involved. When we talk about conflict transformation and peace building, we are not talking only about the 3 tracks, 1, 2, and 3, but specific actors within these tracks, and the kind of roles that they play. So we have that as a basic assumption as well. Then the 5th one is the assumption about the non-linearity of a conflict situation. Non-linearity meaning that we have discussed thus far that a conflict sometimes, have a particular sequence, that it goes from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and so on and so forth. But we are now looking at it from a non-linearity kind of perspective, because a conflict situation is dynamic. It goes up, it goes down, it goes forward, it goes backward. So it doesn't go through a particular sequence as such. In all the conflict situations that we look at, all types of conflict, it goes up and down. It depends on what we put into a particular conflict. Some authors like Morton Deutsch, for example, would say that, if you want something positive, from a situation, then you input positive inputs in there, because negative inputs will have negative result. Okay, so it's as easy as that. So what you put in, the conflict can go up and down. So non-linearity. A conflict can go all the way from dispute all the way to war, and if we feel that from war, then we go to ceasefire and reconciliation and all the other things, we can be wrong, because from war, it can go to ceasefire, but a ceasefire can be broken, and then it goes back to war. So it goes back and forth. So we need to make it clear that in many situations, the conflict is non-linear, and conflict is systemic. We talked already about how it's being affected by the different levels. The Dugan perspective, of it having system and subsystem, and complexity thinking, meaning that it is complex, it is dynamic. So for that particular reason, we need to have a whole of system approach, which is looking at everything, basically, and self-organization, meaning that every actors involved in a particular conflict situation, can have the freedom to organize themselves and to move forward and to contribute in whatever ways that they can. So it does not necessarily be, just one actor doing something, but it can be a multiple situation of multiple actors doing multiple things on their own, and how we can combine all these things, to transform the situation forward. And then last assumption is that transformation through a shared environment. Shared environment meaning working together with the other actors. It is a complex situation. It involves many actors. When we discuss how to move forward, even if we are doing self-organization using our own capacity, our own perspective, the best thing is actually we share this with other actors. Combination of us working on our own and combine with other actors in order to move forward. Okay, and even something like conflict mapping and analysis, for example, should be a shared experience, meaning that we have our own perspective and we do a map and analysis from our own side, but that's our side. Okay, what about the other sides? They have their own map, they have their own analysis. Everybody have their own maps, their own analysis, but that's only from their own perspective. That's why conflict transformation, peace building, needs this shared environment, we communicate, when we share, and we are able to understand, each other better, in that kind of situation. In the literature, in the scholarly activity, there are some research agenda in the studies of conflict transformation and peace building. What do people do research about? When they talk about conflict transformation and peace building, they look at, for example, sources and nature of conflict, from either the subjectivist or the objectivist approaches. Subjectivist is because, it involves emotion, it involves attitudes. Every action or how we look at certain things would depend on our perspective. So it is subject, to our own, our own perception. Objective is because there are certain things that can be explained in, an objective manner. Okay, so you can explain a conflict, looking at the various data that you have, numbers that you have, cases of aggression and all those things. I mean, I have friends in southern Thailand that do research just looking at the number of incidences and number of people either hurt or killed, over the span of time of many years. So, it's all based on that kind of data. Then we do also research on third-party characteristics. Who are the actors that are involved? And then in terms of impartiality or neutrality of the actors, okay? Then strategies, who are the actors that are involved? The different tracks, we already talked about tracks 1, 2, and 3, and the roles that they play, and looking at it from a multi-track kind of perspective, because then this bring us to the strategy of complementarity, for example. How we combine the roles of the different actors so that they can complement each other. Track 1 complement with by track 2 and 3 and vice versa, and contingency basically meaning that when do we do something, and then if it's contingent upon a particular situation, and we have to be ready for all eventuality. So if something is not proper, something is not working, how do we change it? Okay, so we do also research on that. And also we look at the strategies of peacemaking, peace building, peacekeeping, and also all these things. So all of these are basically the kind of research that people have been doing in terms of looking at conflict transformation and peace building. So what is conflict transformation? Bernardin and Austin, they say that conflict transformation is a complex process of constructively changing relationships, attitudes, behaviors, interests, and discourses in violence-prone conflict settings. Okay, a complex process of constructively changing relationship. We want to change relationship, attitudes, behavior, interests, and discourses, but we want to change them in a constructive manner, moving, from difficult to a better situation. So that's how, it is seen. Importantly, conflict transformation addresses and changes underlying structures, cultures, and institutions that encourage and condition violent political and social conflict over the long term. So looking at the underlying structure that has created a particular conflict, because we know that sometimes, we have structural violence within society, and how, to change and transform this structure, so that we can have a better situation, and how we transform also the cultures and institutions, that have been encouraging, violent and political conflict over the long term. So, it's quite comprehensive. Transform, constructively change relationship, attitudes, behaviors, interests, discourses. Okay. Then focusing also on underlying structures, cultures, and institutions. What do you think of this perspective on conflict transformation? But we are looking at conflicts that have been going on for a long time, difficult to move forward. And we know that in order to move forward, we have to do certain things. We have to transform certain things. And we are not also talking about a particular situation. I mean, for example, like I said, conflict transformation is closely connected to peace building. Peace building is the act of building peace in a particular situation, especially from a bottom-up process and involving all the various actors, especially in tracks 2 and 3. And they have also a period of time that they can do these things. Some people, like the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali, mentioned that peace building is in the context of post-conflict peace building. Okay, post-conflict peace building. But many of us disagree, especially people like Lederach and Kerr and myself. We all disagree because peace building should start as soon as possible, even while conflict is ongoing. Okay, so you have that, you have that process starting already. And then we need to look at what can be transformed in terms of the relationship, what can be transformed in terms of attitude, behaviors, and interests, and all those things. So that particular aspect is actually done while the conflict is ongoing, transforming things to get things to move forward and to overcome the difficulties. At the same time, while we are doing this thing, we also have to transform other things. The institutions, the social structures, we have to do a transformation of the mindsets, we have to do peace education and all those things. So to combine everything, yes, it looks like a very long, difficult, difficult task, but it is something that can be done. It is something that should be done. This is the definition that most of us use to define what conflict transformation is. It is a complex process of constructively changing relationships, attitudes, behaviors, interests, and discourses, all those things. Okay, and it addresses and changes underlying structure, culture, and institutions. Okay, so all these things needs to be done. When we transform a particular situation, we move, from a position of unbalance to balance, but we have to go through a situation where sometimes there can be confrontation between the two sides, okay, before we go to negotiation and sustainable peace. But this is something, in the normal progress of conflict, sometimes, this happens. Lederach talk a lot about conflict transformation. Key question is, how do we end something not desired and build something that we do desire? Okay, what can be transformed? And this is from Varinan. Varinan talk about, that there are certain transformers of a conflict situation that we can do in order to move forward the process. And he talks about the need to transform this structure. And structure basically is the relationships, between the actors. How do we transform the structure of relationship from an asymmetric structure to a symmetric structure? Okay, because if you have a situation where the two parties are of unequal power, unequal power, is more difficult to resolve than if they are of equal power. So we can transform the structure of relationships. We can transform the context, we can transform the issues, we can transform personal and group, and we can transform also the actors involved in a conflict situation. Okay, and these are just, the description of some of this transformation. Okay, some of this transformation. And this is actually while the conflict is ongoing. So just imagine, a protracted social conflict that is going on, and it's difficult to move forward, because of the many issues that are involved and how we move, forward. These are some of the suggestions on what needs to be transformed. Context basically means that, a conflict situation does not exist in isolation. We talk about the structural and the systemic nature of a conflict situation. So whatever happens in southern Thailand, Patani, it's not only southern Thailand, because the context, we have to look at the context, in the three the provinces. We have to look at the national context, for example. We have to look at what's happening in Bangkok, the decisions made by the government and the involvement of the royal decisions and all these things, because they also have an impact on what's happening in southern Thailand, Patani. So we need to be able, to see, how the context, can be transformed. Issue, for example, because some people will look at the issue in southern Thailand, from an identity, perspective. And it's always difficult to resolve it if it involves values and all those things. So possibly, looking at it from the perspective of reducing intensity of the conflict, as being done by the Thai government, or looking at development issues and looking at transforming the issues to also include other aspects or other components that might make it more possible, that make it more possible for the actors, to discuss. Personal and group, transforming the way that the minds of the leaders, change, personal transformation. Sometimes leaders change their minds. Sometimes leaders change itself. So actor transformers would be changing one leader with another leader. The previous leader might not be prone, to resolving the conflict. Then we change to another leader who is more conducive, to resolving the conflict situation. But personal change is, you still have the same actor, but then there is a change in the way that the leaders think. Okay, that the leaders think. Okay, so how do we go about doing that? It's going to take a long time, but it can be done. And then structural transformers, meaning that, the situation in southern Thailand is such that the government of Thailand is stronger, more powerful than the liberation movements in southern Thailand. They can get support, international support, as well as from other countries, in order to become in a position where they can sit together with the same level with the Thai government, and that can can influence the process in a positive manner. So all of these are components while the conflict is ongoing. And how do we move the process forward by transforming certain elements, within that particular situation? Then you can look at other conflict situations as well, and to see whether this makes sense or not. For example, in Myanmar, you can look at the structure, context, issue, personal and actor, and how and where basically you need to transform in order to change. To stress on the peace building from below, that we mentioned, and to look at the pyramid of peace as suggested by Ramsbottom, which is something like this, that everybody have contributions onto the peace building process. Okay, and some of the challenges for peace building include a lot of these things. moving beyond the traditional post-conflict peace building, I mentioned already, imagining a peaceful future, conducting needs assessment, developing coherent peace plans, designing effective implementation of plan, developing a comprehensive strategy, acknowledging complementarity of actors. And who are the actors? Tracks 1, 2, and 3 again. So who are these actors and what are some of the strategies that they can take? And time frame. It's going to take a long time, for these things to happen. Yes, it will take a long time, So if we want to do proper peace building, we have to be prepared for the long haul. It's something that not necessarily can be done, within 1 or 2 years. In fact, for 1 or 2 years, it's just about doing preparation, for having social change and for the desired future. And we have really to think about generational change, 20 years and beyond. Some of the activities that needs to be done, and this maybe looks familiar to you. This is the Dugan nested conflict, the components here: issue, relationship, subsystem, and system. We have all these things. And then combine this with the time frame of activity, when do we need to do these things. Some of the peace building strategies that can be mentioned: peace inventory, creating better channels, creating strategic resource groups. We need people with different sets of expertise. Okay, so expert groups on many issues. Link internal and external peacemakers. Some of the peace building strategies. Okay, capacity building, strategic planning, and types of peace building activities. Types of peace building activities, because there are a multitude of actors, the type of activities can also be many. So we have advocacy, capacity building, research, dialogues, workshops, scenario building, relief, humanitarian, development, institutional building, others. We have all these things as part of peace building activities. Okay. Again, remember, we have the peace, just to remind that we have peacemaking top down, and then we have peace building bottom up, and we have different activities that happen, at the top and at the bottom. A lot of these things actually would be done at the bottom up level, where the especially tracks 2 and 3 doing a lot of these things in the effort to build a strong platform for peace. I just summarize, some of the things that we mentioned in our book, in our source book. So you can use the slide, as a guide, but many of these things are also discussed in the textbook, including, transformative peace building, which is our way of combining the two together, conflict transformation and peace building, and using the transformative peace building as an approach that combine all these two. Because in difficult conflict situation, we need to do a comprehensive approach. And a comprehensive approach would need us to transform, many things, including those 5, transformation that we need to do in order to get the process going, and then to transform also other things, relationships, structures, institutions, and to continue and to sustain this for the long term. That's why it takes a long time. Okay, now I'm just trying to bring everything together and come up with a comprehensive sort of like approach, to the whole situation. Is it something that is doable, do you think? One is a symmetric conflict in Maluku, both sides of equal strength. The other one is an asymmetric conflict in the Mindanao, the Bangsa Moro conflict between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Look out for transformers. of conflict situation, because transformers of conflict situation play many roles and can be different actors. And then in the peace building efforts, they can be educators doing peace education, they can be journalists doing peace journalism, they can be civil society organizations doing peace advocacy and all sort of things on the ground. They can be many actors that do their own things in order to transform the conflict situation. So always look out for this. And lastly, also look at the leadership of the conflict groups. If there have been any internal transformation that has happened within these groups. Okay, and we know that without internal personal transformation, they can also be problems in moving forward, in moving forward. Aceh, for example, how did we get peace in Aceh? And people are saying that in the end, it's the power of God, that brought the people together, and then and I don't know whether this is the explanation that you will agree or not, but some people see, for example, the tsunami as a trigger for peace, because it put both parties in a situation where they were forced to work together in order to address the sufferings of the people, and then there is internal personal transformation of the Free Aceh movement, GAM people and the leaders in Jakarta. Okay, because I remember talking to some GAM leaders, GAM leaders, because they have had a process before, round one with the HDC not successful, and then it went back to war and everything. But then the second round after the tsunami, with the CMI, Crisis Management Initiative, we went through 5 rounds of meetings and you have peace. And then people ask why, what happened, and a former leader of Aceh said that, look, we are in the business of fighting for our people, but when our people are suffering so much on the ground because of the tsunami and the earthquake and all these things, we cannot make them suffer even more. That's why then we transform how we look at things and move on, beyond all those things and move, to finding peace in Aceh. We can say that as an example of personal, transformation. In the Bangsa Moro struggle, for example, the Moro Islamic Liberation Movement, the Ustad Salamat Hashim, for example, the leader of the MILF, they have been in a fight with the Philippine government for a long time, and then initially he didn't want to be involved in the peace process, but then he said that, okay, let's move on, into a peace process, and people ask him why, before you did not want to be you did not want to be in the process, and now you want. And then he said, look, I have struggled all my life fighting against injustice. I don't mind suffering, but I cannot allow my children and grandchildren to suffer even more, because of our struggle. And he said that, in our religion, if our enemy extend a hand for peace, it is our obligation to receive that hand. So let's try this. So let's move on. So in fact, it's true, like Kaz say, he himself becomes a transformer because he has transformed his own perspective. And when the leader does that, followers follow. So certain things can happen, in order to move things forward, to constructively change the situation. And when that happens, it can create better relations and improve, process for everybody. Interesting, you ask this question, because we always say that, look at our own local wisdom and local practice, with that romanticized view that everything local must be good, and the local wisdom is always best as compared to other kind of wisdom, which is not necessarily true, like you said, because there are certain practices that people do, within their culture, for years and years, and it is something that is, to us, or and to you know is something that is not really peaceful, that certain things have to change, and it's difficult to change, but then I think what can be done is through education, through dialogue, to highlighting, that this situation actually can be improved if we have a different approach to it, and providing alternatives, strategies to resolve their problems and all those things, then those things, can be transformed, and can be changed. It's in the minds, and we have to, and that's where peace education is important. Peace education is important. UNESCO Constitution preamble said that, because because war begins in the minds of men and women. This is where we should construct, the defense, the wars against all this war and violence. So that's why we have peace education. But we have to be careful also that we do not impose our own values, towards others, because not necessarily these values are also good, or universal, universal. But something like human rights, I think, is something that can be used, because we have, universal human rights. Everybody have all these things, and there's something that we can push.